Welcome in for the 11th Sunday after Pentecost. This is August 21st, and miracle of miracles, the camera is working again. Don't ask me how. Nothing was done that hadn't been done before, but it worked this time. So we give thanks that is working, and hopefully it will remain working. We'll see. It is indeed the 11th Sunday after Pentecost. The colors remain green over here. And we have the readings for August 21st is the Old Testament reading, Jeremiah chapter 1, verses 4 through 10. The song reading is Psalm 71, verses 1 through 6, and that is in the hymnal, the United Methodist hymnal at 794. The epistle reading is Hebrews chapter 12, verses 18 through 29. And then the gospel reading is Luke chapter 13, verses 10 through 17. The Old Testament reading is Jeremiah chapter 1, verses 4 through 10. This is the call of Jeremiah. The Lord's word came to me. Before I created you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I made you a prophet to the nations. Ah, Lord God, I said, I don't know how to speak because I'm only a child. The Lord responded, Don't say I'm only a child. Where I send you, you must go. What I tell you, you must say. Don't be afraid of them because I'm with you to rescue you, declares the Lord. Then the Lord stretched out his hand, touched my mouth, and said to me, I'm putting my words in your mouth. This very day I appoint you over nations and empires to dig up and pull down, to destroy and demolish, to build and plant. So there's always a great deal in these readings. The Bible is full of things can be looked at. But today, what stands out to me in just the quick response that we do for these fireside chats is actually verse 10 there. Um, this is a call to a prophet, and this is God calling Jeremiah to be a prophet. And verse 10 kind of says, This is what I'm calling you to do. And the kind of the definition of a prophet was being appointed over nations and empires to dig up and pull down, to destroy and demolish, to build and to plant. Now, it's not that every prophet ever is going to have that job description, and certainly Jeremiah's job description is indeed that as you go through the rest of the book, and in that order too, right? He proclaims um, problems to the empire and to the kingdom. He pulls down the king and announces problems to him, winds up getting thrown in jail for that. And then he watches over the demolishing of the kingdom, the destruction of the kingdom. But then, as it's leaving, right, as the Syrians are there, or the Babylonians are there surrounding the capital, he goes and buys a field, says, "Hey, you'll be back. Don't worry, the Lord will watch out for you." And ultimately, he winds up at the end of the book of Jeremiah, he winds up prophesying, good things. Um, in the midst of the end of the kingdom, he prophesies that a new thing will be reborn, and so he's doing this. This is what Jeremiah does. But I do think that a lot of it, of all prophets, of all proclaiming of God's word, involves both of these aspects, right? It involves, pulling down the mighty, and it involves lifting up the lowly and building up the church and tearing down those things that are not of Christ. And so you're trying to bridge those two things, right? I think that for many of us, we think of proclaiming God's word, and we think of propheticness as just being, one or the other, right? Propheticness is either you're declaring to the world all of its sin, or good news, good news, good news, good news, nothing but good news make me feel good. But in reality, this world is complex. Living as humans is complex, and following God as well as proclaiming God is complex, and it has all of these things. And I just that was sticking out to me as I read this from from God to Jeremiah this morning. Our psalm reading today is Psalm 71, verses 1 through 6. I've taken refuge in you, Lord. Don't let me ever be put to shame. Deliver me and rescue me by your righteousness. Bend your ear toward me and save me. Be my rock of refuge, where I can always escape. You commanded that my life be saved because you are my rock and my fortress. My God, rescue me from the power of the wicked. Rescue me from the grip of the wrongdoer and the oppressor, because you are my hope, Lord. You, Lord, are the one I've trusted since childhood. I've depended on you from birth. You cut the cord when I came from my mother's womb. My praise is always about you. So here we see one of many times in the book of Psalms, particularly where we see this imagery of God as a refuge. In that day and age, there would be kind of a fort usually nearby, right? Some kind of fortress, some kind of bunker, um, where if the city was threatened, if the people were under attack, they could run to that fortress, and that was their refuge, right? That they would have these massive defenses that people that they could hide behind, that the attacking army would struggle to defeat. This was their refuge. This was their bunker. This was their safety. Um, and so this imagery of God in that way, right, as something nearby to us that in our times of struggle, in our times of crisis, we run to God as a refuge, as a bunker, as a safe haven, which is certainly something that we see among Christians, among people of faith, even to this day, right? We see this idea of running to God as a refuge, and in when we're in the midst of crisis, coming to God and wanting to have that time to be there to pray and to acknowledge our own mortality, our own problems, and so I think that seeing that imagery is always helpful, and being reminded of God being that refuge for us, being that place where we can go to and find rest, find respite, and find a hope that God is always that way. The epistle reading is Hebrews chapter 12, verses 18 through 29. This is labeled as the priestly service in heavenly Jerusalem. You haven't drawn near to something that can be touched, a burning fire, darkness, shadow, a whirlwind, a blast of a trumpet, and the sound of words that made the ones who heard it beg that there wouldn't be one more word. They couldn't stand the command. If even a wild animal touches the mountain, it must be stoned. The sight was so frightening that Moses said, I'm terrified and shaking. But you have drawn near to Mount Sion, the city of the living God, heavenly Jerusalem, to countless angels in a festival gathering, to the assembly of God's firstborn children who are registered in heaven, to God, the judge of all, to the spirits of the righteous who have been made perfect, to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks better than Abel's blood. See to it that you don't resist the one who is speaking. If the people didn't escape when they refused to listen to the one who warned them on earth, how will we escape if we reject the one who is warning from heaven? His voice shook the earth then, but now he has made a promise. Still once more I will shake not only the earth, but heaven also. The word still once more reveal the removal of what is shaken, the things that are part of this creation, so that what isn't shaken will remain. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that can't be shaken, let's continue to express our gratitude. With this gratitude, let's serve in a way that is pleasing to God with respect and awe, because our God really is a consuming fire. As we look at this, I see many words that are used quite often around us. Um, this passage speaks of a warning. It speaks of a desire to save, um, to escape. The Common English Bible uses here. Um, and I think that as we read these words and as we read this passage, the natural response, the natural thought is to um, look at that and to go, yes, we're trying to escape, and that all these people who I disagree with, they need to escape. They need to heed the warning. But I'm reminded here as I read this that a warning is talked about, but it's not described. A plea is talked about, but it's not described. Uh, and when that happens, when someone talks about something that, of course, we all know what this is really talking about, but they don't actually define it, what happens with that is that you, the listener or the reader, wind up putting in just human nature. We wind up putting in what we're concerned about and what we are warning about, um, what we are pleading for our neighbors and for our family, for our friends to escape from, because we believe it to be bad. And yet, um, there's no guarantee that that's what is being described here. Um, I enjoy reading about and learning about church history. And as I do, I'm constantly reminded of the fact that throughout the generations, people would have read this passage and they would have been sure that they knew that the author of Hebrews was talking about whatever the big thing was at that time. And to escape the you know to escape, I do think that everyone for 2,000 years would agree that they're talking about escaping hell. But how do you escape the tribulation? How do you escape this thing? How do you get to the goal that the author of Hebrews is certainly wanting everyone to get to? Well, you avoid whatever the big deal is that point. Um, and I think we'd be amazed if we managed to have a time machine and went back 300 years. What would they be talking about as the things that we need to make sure we avoid? It's not going to be the same things that we're talking about. In fact, we may be doing many of the things that they would be sitting here going like, you have to avoid this. And so, and I think I'm approach verses like this with caution. Um, I think it's a good thing to remember that there is stakes in this life, and that there are things that we're trying to avoid, and um, that we're trying to do our best to follow Christ and be with Christ, both in this life and especially in the life to come. We're certainly trying to do that, but I think it's important to remember as we read these passages to remember that this plea from Jesus is not about for us to go and make sure that our neighbor is following everything that Jesus had said. Right? There's multiple times where Jesus says, "Hey, no, focus on yourself, um, and grow yourself. Yes, share the good news. You're called to go to your neighbor, and you're called to bring that neighbor to Christ. But when you bring that neighbor to Christ, it's not to go and now Jesus tell him about all this stuff that I told him was wrong. No, when you bring that neighbor to Christ, you then get down on your knees too, and together you're there on your knees worshiping Christ. And so, um, I think that it's good to remember, right, that the log is in our own eye. There's only a splinter usually in our neighbor's eye, although there might be a log. We see the splinter, right? Um, and so it's important to remember that first and foremost, when we read these passages about judgment, when we read these passages about escaping the tribulation, when we read all these things, uh, they're very important passages, and they're very important to remember that the stakes are real, but that the stakes are real for us, and that first and foremost we must enter into prayer, and first and foremost we must enter into worship, and first and foremost we must follow God based on our own need to get rid of the log in our own eye. And that applies to each and every person, I suspect, each and every person on the planet, um, to varying degrees, sure, but I suspect that every one of us have something that God would want us to work on. Finally, our gospel reading is Luke chapter 13, verses 10 through 17. This is titled Healing on the Sabbath, or on a Sabbath. Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. A woman was there who had been disabled by a spirit for 18 years. She was bent over and couldn't stand up straight. When he saw her, Jesus called her to him and said, "Woman, you are set free from your sickness." He placed his hands on her, and she straightened up at once and praised God. The synagogue leader, incensed that Jesus had healed on the Sabbath, responded, "There are 6 days during which work is permitted. Come and be healed on those days, not on the Sabbath day." The Lord replied, "Hypocrites! Don't each of you on the Sabbath untie your ox or donkey from its stall and lead it out to get a drink? Then isn't it necessary that this woman, a daughter of Abraham, bound by Satan for 18 long years, be set free from her bondage on the Sabbath day?" When he said these things, all his opponents were put to shame. but all those in the crowd rejoiced at the extraordinary things he was doing. There's a ton here. I think I've gone on long enough about legalism and rules and things. Um, I think that right now what I wanted to do with this passage is just to point out the synagogue leader here. He's incensed that Jesus healed on the Sabbath, um, but Jesus didn't just heal on the Sabbath. He did a miracle. Right, like healing this woman on the Sabbath would have been, in that day and age, probably, putting some oil on her, maybe some leeches or something, some kind of medical work. Medical work on the Sabbath would not have looked like, woman, you're healed, and putting his hands on her. He's not practicing medicine of the day. He's not even practicing medicine of today. Right? He's not even giving a pill or something that would help with things. He's performing a miracle right in front of this guy, right in front of the synagogue leader. And the synagogue leader can't see it. All he can see is that some healing got done, and that must have been work. Right? We can't actually describe what that work is. See, he just puts his hand on her. But that must have been work because healing has been done, and therefore that's a violation of the Sabbath. That's a horrible, horrible thing. And I, what just strikes me here is like, you missed it. You missed it. God was right there in front of you, and you missed it. And I can get into why it was missed or not, but I don't think that's the point. Because what we do and what we focus on instead of focusing on the miracles that are right in front of us change from era to era, from century to century, from year to year sometimes. But he missed it, and I think that what we all should take from this story, as well as many other stories similar to this throughout the Gospels, is slow down a little bit. Slow down a little bit. Be in that constant attitude of prayer that I believe it's Paul talks about. Just be constantly there and able for God to speak to you and able for God to point out when the miracles are happening right in front of you, because miracles continue to happen in this world and we continue to miss it because we're too focused on something else. That's really what I look at here as I see this, and at least one of the things here that I see this, right? Jesus has compassion for the woman, yes, but the synagogue leader has compassion for the woman too. But he's too bound by what he's focused on and what's important to him to then notice that a miracle has just happened in front of him, and to notice who Jesus is. That Jesus isn't just another rabbi that can be in an argument with him, that can be in a debate, can be engaged in that way. But Jesus is the Son of God, and Jesus is showing that Jesus is the Son of God through miracles like this that he's missing because he's ready for debate. We need to slow down, and we need to focus in on what Jesus is doing around us. If we did that, we think we'd be amazed at what Jesus is doing around us and even within our communities.